Do you remember those grocery items? The ones that filled your 1970s pantry but somehow vanished from memory? Back then, those boxes, cans, and jars weren't just food. They were part of every family's routine, shaping what dinner looked like across America. When did the ordinary things that once defined us become the ones we forgot? Jello 1, 2, 3 was one of those desserts that made the 1970s feel like the future had arrived in a mixing bowl. You would stir, pour, and chill it, and somehow, like a kitchen miracle, it would separate itself into 3 perfect layers. Kids thought it was pure magic. Parents loved how easy it was, and guests thought it looked downright sophisticated. The top was light and foamy, the middle smooth like mousse, and the bottom was that familiar wobbly Jello jiggle that defined a decade of desserts. Every potluck table and birthday party seemed to have one shining in its glass dish, usually in electric shades of strawberry pink or lime green. It was the kind of food that made people smile before they even took a bite. Of course, the science behind it was simple, just whipped gelatin reacting differently as it set. But that never mattered. To a generation raised on space exploration and color television, Jello 1, 2, 3 felt like dessert engineered by NASA. When it disappeared from grocery shelves in the 1990s, it left behind a strange nostalgia for the kind of wonder only the 1970s could create. Because back then, even dessert came with a little bit of mystery. Tang was the powdered orange drink that promised to take you to outer space, even if you never left your kitchen. Marketed as the official drink of astronauts, it made every breakfast table feel like a mini mission control. Parents loved it because it was affordable, shelf-stable, and fast. Kids loved it because it turned plain water into liquid sunshine. You would pour the orange powder into a pitcher, stir until it fizzed, and watch it transform. The flavor? Half citrus, half sugar, and somehow still unforgettable. It tasted like optimism, the kind of taste that made kids think the future was going to be all rockets and robots. But really, Tang lived its life far from space. It sat in suburban cupboards, packed into thermoses for school lunches, and mixed into pitchers at backyard barbecues. It became the drink of choice for the ordinary family that wanted to feel extraordinary even for a moment. And while it might have started with astronauts, it ended with kids in sticky orange mustaches laughing in the summer sun. If you wanted to feel sleek, modern, and just a little rebellious in the 1970s, you reached for a can of Tab. It was the diet cola that promised you could have it all: flavor, fizz, and a slim waistline too. With its soft pink can and distinctive metallic tang, Tab became the drink of the cool aunt, the office secretary, and anyone who cared just enough about calories but still needed their caffeine fix. It was the first true diet culture icon in a can, years before Diet Coke made calorie-free cool. The taste wasn't exactly loved. It was sharp, bitter, and left an aftertaste that reminded you of sweetener science experiments. But somehow that was part of the charm. People drank it anyway, maybe because it felt daring to sip something that didn't taste traditionally sweet. You could spot Tab in every office fridge and by every poolside lounger, its pink label glinting in the sun. It was not just a soda, it was an attitude. Today, Tab lives on as a quirky relic of a time when people laughed, worked, and dieted their way through a fizzy version of progress. Shake and Bake turned family dinners into tiny kitchen performances. You poured the golden breadcrumb mix into a bag, dropped in some chicken, gave it a good shake, and voila! Crispy magic without a single drop of oil. It was marketed as easy, mess-free, and almost foolproof, which made it a lifesaver for busy parents who wanted to serve something that looked homemade. The shaking part was half the fun, especially for kids who got to help make dinner without really cooking anything. The smell of it baking filled kitchens across the country, warm, savory, and just a little bit salty. It gave weeknight dinners a kind of cozy excitement that real frying never could. The commercials even bragged, "And I helped," a slogan that became its own piece of pop culture. For many families, it became part of the weekly routine, right alongside mashed potatoes and green beans from a can. It wasn't gourmet, but it didn't have to be. Shake and Bake wasn't about perfection. It was about pride, And in the 1970s, nothing felt more like a home-cooked victory than pulling a tray of golden, crunchy chicken out of the oven. There was something strangely comforting about peeling back the foil on a TV dinner and staring at those perfect little compartments. Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, green peas, and a mystery dessert, all sealed into a shiny tray that promised a full meal in minutes. In the 1970s, convenience was everything, and nothing said convenience like eating dinner right from your lap while watching the evening news. Sure, the peas were mushy and the potatoes were often half frozen, but that was part of the charm. Families would pop them into the oven, wait for the smell of gravy and aluminum to fill the kitchen, and call it a night. The portions were small, but the feeling was big. This was modern living. It was the meal of busy parents, latchkey kids, and late-night snackers. The foil crinkled, the desserts boiled over, and yet everyone kept buying them. Maybe because it made life easier, or maybe because for a moment you could eat alone and still feel part of something bigger. A whole nation of people doing the same thing. Hamburger Helper was the dinner hero that arrived just in time. Families in the 1970s were juggling tighter budgets, and ground beef became the go-to ingredient for stretching every dollar. Enter Hamburger Helper, promising a full, hearty meal with just 1 pan and 1 pound of meat. You mixed the packet, poured in the noodles, added milk or water, and waited as it thickened into something warm and satisfying. The sound of the spoon scraping the pot became a nightly soundtrack in countless kitchens. It was quick, filling, and surprisingly comforting. No frills, just flavor. Parents loved the simplicity, kids loved the creamy sauce, and everyone loved not doing the dishes. Betty Crocker sold more than food. She sold peace of mind in a box. It was the symbol of middle-class resourcefulness, a meal that proved dinner didn't need to be fancy to feel like home. Even today, the smell of Hamburger Helper simmering can transport people straight back to those linoleum-floored kitchens where small victories were measured in clean plates and satisfied smiles. If there's one food that defined 1970s childhoods, it came in a blue box. Kraft macaroni and cheese was a miracle of speed and color, a bright orange bowl of instant happiness. You boiled the noodles, added butter and milk, then stirred in the neon cheese powder that felt like culinary magic. Every child knew the sight of that powder cloud rising from the pot like a puff of orange smoke, a signal that dinner was moments away. The scent alone could pull the whole family into the kitchen, drawn by the promise of comfort in a bowl. In minutes, you had dinner. It wasn't fancy, but it was everything a kid could want. Warm, creamy, and just the right mix of salty and sweet. Parents loved it because it was cheap and foolproof. Kids loved it because it was pure comfort. The orange hue was iconic, glowing on every plate, every birthday table, every quick lunch. It made its way into college dorms, family picnics, and every kitchen in between. Even when fresh ingredients were hard to come by, Kraft's promise never failed. 1 box fed a family, filled a stomach, and reminded everyone that simplicity could taste like joy. Long before comfort food became a trend, this was what comfort looked like. Pop open the can, heat it up, and you had a meal that every kid in the 1970s recognized instantly. SpaghettiOs with little meatballs were the definition of fun food. Round pasta in a tangy tomato sauce with those tiny spongy meatballs floating inside. The smell alone could take over a kitchen. It was the kind of meal you could eat with a spoon while watching cartoons, dripping orange sauce down your chin. The moment that familiar slurp echoed through the room, you knew someone had cracked open a can of pure childhood. It was messy, loud, and somehow always worth every stained shirt and sauce-splattered countertop. Parents trusted it because it was quick and filling, and kids loved it because it felt made just for them. Every lunchbox, every pantry, and every babysitter's counter had at least 1 can ready to go. Sure, it wasn't gourmet, but it was comfort you could pour right out of a can. And somehow that mattered. The jingle, "Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs," still echoes in people's minds because it wasn't just food. It was a feeling. A spoonful of nostalgia, a taste of independence, and a reminder of simpler times when dinner came in circles. Cool Whip was the crown jewel of 1970s dessert tables. It was light, airy, and perfectly sweet, scooped out of a plastic tub and spread over pies, cakes, and fruit salads. The fact that it came frozen made it feel futuristic. Whipped cream that never spoiled, never wept, and was always ready to serve. Every fridge had one tucked in the corner, waiting for a Sunday dessert emergency. Opening the lid felt like uncovering treasure, that smooth white swirl looking almost too perfect to touch. Kids would sneak a fingerful when no one was watching, leaving little spoon marks that told on them every single time. The taste wasn't exactly cream, but nobody cared. It was fluffy, it was easy, and it made everything look fancier than it really was. Families used it for everything: strawberries, puddings, gelatin molds, or just straight from the spoon when no one was watching. It symbolized everything the 1970s stood for: convenience, creativity, and a love for anything that looked a little too perfect. Even after dinner, when the dishes were done and the house smelled of sugar and coffee, that tub of Cool Whip stood waiting in the freezer, quietly promising the next sweet moment. Before juice boxes or sports drinks, there was high C and bright metal cans that clinked in every grocery cart. The colors were bold: neon orange, cherry red, and fruit punch pink, and the flavors were even louder. Opening one meant a satisfying hiss and an instant sugar rush. Kids gulped it after bike rides, at playgrounds, or at the picnic table while the sun blazed overhead. The first sip always hit hard, a jolt of sweetness that made you laugh mid-drink. It tasted like freedom, sunshine, and just a hint of rebellion on a summer afternoon. It wasn't about hydration, it was about fun. The sweetness stuck to your lips, and your tongue turned whatever color you were drinking. Parents pretended it was fruit juice, but everyone knew it was liquid candy. It fueled long summer afternoons, sticky hands, and laughter that carried until the streetlights came on. Every sip was childhood in a can, bright, loud, and full of energy. Today's drinks might be healthier, but none have the same electric joy that High C delivered. It wasn't just a fruit drink, it was the taste of summer itself. Chef Boyardee ravioli was the ultimate peace treaty between parents and kids in the 1970s. Kids loved it because it was warm, saucy, and ready in minutes. Parents tolerated it because at least it counted as dinner. The can hissed open with a metallic sigh, releasing the familiar smell of tomato sauce and nostalgia before it even hit the stove. Those soft, overstuffed little pasta squares floated in their bright orange sauce like they were swimming in liquid comfort. The texture was mushy, the flavor barely Italian, and yet somehow, it hit the spot every single time. The commercials made it look gourmet, but no one was fooled. Still, when time was short or paychecks were tighter, Chef Boyardee saved the day. It was a miracle of simplicity: dump, heat, and eat. Every spoonful tasted like after-school cartoons, worn-out linoleum, and the simple relief of not doing dishes. Some kids even ate it cold straight from the can, sitting cross-legged in front of the television while the adults talked about bills. It was a meal for latchkey kids, busy families, and everyone in between. For all its quirks, it was comfort food that didn't care about judgment or presentation. And even today, that familiar red can still brings back the memory of a simpler time, when dinner was just a can opener away. Swanson's Hungry Man dinners were the food equivalent of a 1970s muscle car, big, bold, and way more than anyone really needed. These frozen feasts promised to satisfy real men with appetites larger than life. The ads practically shouted masculinity: thick slabs of meat, heaps of potatoes, corn drowning in butter, and a brownie for dessert, all packed into one foil tray. Just peel back the lid, stick it in the oven, and wait for the magic, or at least something resembling it, to happen. When you pulled it out, the portions looked enormous, even if the flavors were questionable. The mashed potatoes scorched at the edges, the gravy bubbled like lava, and the brownie was inevitably cemented to its corner. But that was part of the charm. It was hearty, it was hot, and it was American. Families joked that you needed an appetite and an iron stomach to finish one. Yet somehow every freezer had a few stocked for emergencies, especially nights when cooking felt like too much work. It became a symbol of the 1970s working-class dinner, fast, filling, and proudly over the top. Even the box itself, with its bold lettering and photos of steaming plates, felt like a statement piece. Looking back, Hungry Man dinners were less about food and more about fantasy. The dream that you could feed your hunger, your pride, and your exhaustion all at once without ever touching a pan. Campbell's cream of mushroom soup wasn't just soup. It was glue for the American casserole. In the 1970s, it was the secret ingredient in everything from tuna noodle bakes to green bean casseroles, and every family swore by it. The red and white can sat proudly in pantries across the country, ready to save any meal from blandness. Open the can, and out came that thick beige sludge that somehow turned into magic once mixed with noodles or rice. Moms called it their kitchen helper because it made everything creamy, hearty, and just the right amount of salty. It smelled like comfort, warm, savory, and slightly nostalgic. It wasn't fancy, but that was never the point. It was dependable, a symbol of stability in a decade when everything else was changing. You could walk into 10 houses across 10 states, and odds were good you'd taste that same flavor at least once a week. For many, it was the flavor of family reunions, church potlucks, and nights when everyone gathered around the table, tired but together. And yes, it's still around, still holding casseroles together after all these years. Because no matter how modern our recipes get, there's something about that creamy mushroom base that feels like home and tastes like love. If you were a kid in the 1970s, Kool-Aid was not just a drink, it was an experience. Those tiny, colorful packets held more magic than they had any right to. You'd rip one open, dump the powder into a pitcher, add sugar and water, and suddenly you were a scientist mixing up happiness. The kitchen counter became a lab of swirling colors: cherry red, electric blue, neon green. The air smelled like candy and childhood dreams. Kids stirred until their arms ached, tasting and adjusting like miniature chemists. The result was always deliciously too sweet, staining tongues and lips for hours. Parents rolled their eyes at the sugar rush, but deep down they knew that pitcher meant joy. Kool-Aid wasn't just a drink, it was a ritual. It fueled sleepovers, backyard sprinklers, and sticky summer afternoons where the only rule was to have fun. And who could forget the Kool-Aid man bursting through walls shouting, "Oh yeah!" It wasn't just marketing, it was a movement. Kool-Aid turned every ordinary day into a tiny celebration, a mix of color, chaos, and laughter in every glass. Instant mashed potatoes were one of the 1970s greatest kitchen shortcuts. The idea that a warm, creamy side dish could come from a box of flakes felt like magic, or a trick, depending on who you asked. Moms swore by them when dinner had to be fast. You'd boil water, stir in the powder, and watch as it transformed into something that looked suspiciously close to the real thing. The first bite was always a surprise, light, buttery, and a little too smooth to be natural. Still, nobody complained. They went perfectly with meatloaf, fried chicken, or anything that came from a foil tray. Some families even doctored them with milk, pepper, or melted butter to make them taste more homemade. Kids, of course, didn't care either way. They were just happy for a scoop next to their gravy. It became a staple of American practicality, a symbol of doing your best with what you had. Even today, that first puff of steam when you mix the flakes and water smells like nostalgia. It's not the potatoes people miss. It's the feeling of comfort that came with every spoonful. The little blue box of Jiffy corn muffin mix was a quiet hero of 1970s kitchens. Just add milk and an egg, and in minutes, you had golden muffins that could turn even the simplest dinner into something special. The batter came together in seconds, but the smell lingered in the air for hours, warm, buttery, and a little sweet. Every oven across America seemed to bake the same comforting scent. Jiffy muffins showed up everywhere, next to chili, fried chicken, or a Sunday roast. Some people added a bit of sugar for extra sweetness, others threw in jalapenos or creamed corn to make it fancy. But no matter how you tweaked it, the result was always the same: fluffy, golden perfection. Kids loved smearing them with butter until it melted into every crumb. It wasn't about gourmet, it was about home. The box was small, the recipe simple, and the results unforgettable. Even now, that cheerful blue packaging still pops off store shelves like a memory that refuses to fade. One bite, and you're back at the family table, laughing, eating, and reaching for just one more muffin. No dessert table in the 1970s was complete without a bowl of fruit cocktail glistening in heavy syrup. You could always spot it at potlucks, school lunches, and Sunday dinners, chunks of peach, pear, grape, and pineapple swimming in sugary liquid. But the real star was the single red cherry. Every kid knew the unspoken rule: whoever got the cherry won. Parents laughed as kids poked through their bowls with spoons, hunting for treasure. It was the simplest dessert imaginable, but somehow it felt fancy, especially when topped with a dollop of Cool Whip. For families short on time, it was the perfect solution: open, pour, and serve. It looked bright, cheerful, and just indulgent enough to make a weeknight feel like a celebration. The syrup was so sweet it stuck to your teeth, but that didn't stop anyone from drinking it straight from the bowl. Fruit cocktail was more than dessert. It was a sugary symbol of joy, competition, and the shared sweetness of growing up in a time when even a canned cherry could make you smile. Vienna sausages were the ultimate contradiction of the 1970s: tiny, squishy, and oddly elegant. They came packed in a small can of mystery oil, their pale pink color glistening under the kitchen light. You'd peel back the lid and instantly recognize the smell: part pork, part nostalgia, part confusion. Parents called them snack food, kids called them weird little hot dogs, and everyone had an opinion. You could eat them cold, fry them up, or stick them on toothpicks for parties where people pretended to be sophisticated. They showed up in lunchboxes, camping trips, and cocktail spreads, right beside Ritz crackers and cubes of cheese. Sure, they were soft and oily, but that was part of their charm. They were cheap, convenient, and endlessly versatile. For some, Vienna sausages were a guilty pleasure. For others, they were pure comedy, food that made you laugh even as you ate it. Decades later, their place in history is secure, not because they were delicious, but because they were unforgettable. And sometimes, that's enough. Underwood Deviled Ham came in a tiny can with a red devil grinning from the label, mischievous, mysterious, and oddly inviting. It was one of those products that always appeared at picnics or in lunchboxes, whether you asked for it or not. The moment you peeled back the lid, the smell hit you: salty, smoky, and slightly suspicious. Spread it on white bread or crackers, and it became a strange sort of delicacy. Nobody could quite describe what was in it, but everyone knew the taste. It was rich, tangy, and unmistakably deviled. Moms loved it because it required zero effort. Kids ate it because it was different. And somehow that little devil on the label made it feel daring. It was the kind of food that didn't belong to any specific meal. Breakfast, lunch, or snack. It fit everywhere. Some people loved it, some pretended to, but everyone remembered it. Even now, that tiny can still sits on grocery shelves like a relic of a time when convenience came with a wink and a mystery. Tuna in oil was the quiet workhorse of the 1970s kitchen. Chicken of the sea was everywhere, from lunchboxes to church potlucks to family dinners. The can opened with a satisfying pop, releasing that unmistakable scent that filled the room before anyone even grabbed the can opener. Mixed with mayonnaise, it became tuna salad, the sandwich filling of the decade. Mixed with noodles and Campbell's soup, it turned into tuna casserole, a budget meal that fed an army. The oil made it rich, smooth, and far more indulgent than today's water-packed versions. Every household had its own recipe. Some added celery for crunch, others chopped pickles or hard-boiled eggs. Whatever the mix, it always felt like comfort in its simplest form. It was food for working families, for late-night snacks, for next-day lunches packed in wax paper. The smell might have been divisive, but the memories weren't. Tuna in oil wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable, and in the 1970s, that meant everything. Carnation evaporated milk was one of those quiet kitchen heroes that sat in every 1970s pantry, waiting for its moment to shine. It was not flashy, not something kids begged for, but it was always there, reliable, creamy, and ready for anything. Open a can and you had the secret ingredient for everything from coffee to casseroles. It gave pies their richness, soups their silkiness, and mashed potatoes their magic. The label, with its red and white lettering, was instantly recognizable, the kind of brand loyalty that felt like tradition more than habit. Housewives swore by it. Cooks used it without thinking. It was part of the rhythm of kitchen life. When company came over, a splash went into the coffee for a touch of luxury. At Thanksgiving, it found its way into pumpkin pie filling, turning ordinary desserts into family legends. There was something deeply comforting about it, a sense that no matter what you were making, Carnation could fix it. It belonged to a generation that valued thrift and creativity, where one can could stretch a recipe or save a dessert. Even its slightly caramelized flavor hinted at care and patience, a flavor born from slow simmering. You can still find it on shelves today, but few use it with the same reverence. Back then, it was not just milk. It was the taste of home, stability, and the quiet art of making something from almost nothing. Long before anyone blended kale or counted protein grams, Carnation Instant Breakfast promised a complete meal in a glass. For busy families of the 1970s, it was a miracle in powder form. Just add milk, stir, and breakfast was ready before the school bus came down the street. Moms loved it because it was efficient. Dads liked it because it felt modern. And kids loved it because it tasted like chocolate milk. The commercials were full of smiling parents touting how it gave energy to last all morning, as if a scoop of powder could change the world. In a decade obsessed with convenience, it fit perfectly. No frying pans, no dishes, just a few seconds and a straw. Flavors like chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry turned breakfast into a treat, and for many teenagers, it became the go-to meal before early classes. Even athletes and dieters jumped on board, thinking it was futuristic nutrition straight out of NASA's playbook. It was part health food, part indulgence, and all nostalgia. The box promised vitamins and minerals, but the real magic was in how easy it made mornings. The idea of drinking your meal felt space-age then, like something straight out of the Jetsons. And while smoothies and protein shakes have since stolen its thunder, nothing has ever quite matched the comforting sweetness of that frothy glass of Carnation Instant Breakfast. For those who grew up on it, it was not just a drink, it was a symbol of progress, optimism, and the belief that the future would always come in powdered form. Before sugar came in resealable bags and sleek containers, it lived in a sturdy paper box with a name that felt like a song: Dixie Crystals. Every 1970s pantry had at least one sitting proudly on the shelf, its bright red and blue design practically shouting from across the kitchen, "Bake like Grandma!" It was more than sugar. It was an invitation. The box represented comfort, Sunday baking, and the unmistakable smell of something sweet rising in the oven. Moms poured it into measuring cups for cakes and pies, kids dipped spoons into it when no one was looking, and grandmothers swore by it as the only proper sugar. The name alone evoked a sense of Southern charm, even if you lived nowhere near Dixie. When the holidays rolled around, the box sat front and center on the counter, dusting counters and tabletops in a fine, glittery film. It was a time when baking wasn't just cooking, it was connection. Families didn't buy sugar for recipes, they bought it for moments. A pitcher of sweet tea on a hot day, a pan of fudge cooling on the stove, a batch of cookies waiting to be shared, Dixie Crystals was there for all of it. Even its cardboard box had a comforting crinkle, softening with use until it felt like part of the kitchen itself. Nowadays, sugar is just another ingredient, but back then, Dixie Crystals was pure joy in a box. It was proof that life could be sweet with just a scoop and a smile. Before Pop-Tarts became the king of the toaster, Pillsbury had its own vision of the future: space-age toaster pastries. The name alone sounded exciting, like breakfast engineered for astronauts. They came in shiny foil wrappers with flavors that promised modern convenience and cosmic adventure all in one bite. chocolate fudge, strawberry, cinnamon. Each one was supposed to blast your morning into orbit. The commercials played up the theme, showing futuristic kitchens and smiling families who looked like they'd stepped out of a sci-fi movie. You'd drop one in the toaster, and within minutes, the whole room filled with the smell of warm frosting and artificial fruit. The edges were always a little burnt, and the filling hotter than the surface of the sun, but that didn't stop anyone. Kids ate them on the go, half wrapped in foil, trying not to burn their fingers. Parents pretended they were giving their kids a good start to the day, even though everyone knew they were basically dessert. But that was the magic of the 1970s, the decade when convenience and imagination collided. Pillsbury's pastries made breakfast feel new, exciting, and a little bit rebellious. For a moment, every kitchen became a launch pad, every toaster a control panel. Though Pop-Tarts would eventually win the race, these pastries remain a sweet, half-forgotten memory of a time when the future tasted like frosting, and every breakfast felt like liftoff. Space food sticks were the snack that made every kid in the 1970s feel like an astronaut, at least until they actually tasted one. Marketed as the cutting edge of space-age nutrition, these chewy, tube-shaped bars promised to fuel your body like the astronauts. The packaging was sleek and scientific, the commercials filled with rocket launches and astronauts floating in zero gravity. For parents, it sounded healthy. For kids, it sounded cool. But one bite revealed the truth. They were dense, flavorless, and had the texture of erasers. Still, that didn't stop kids from begging for them. There was something thrilling about eating the same food NASA used, even if it tasted like sweetened clay. Lunchboxes everywhere carried them alongside bologna sandwiches and juice boxes. On playgrounds, kids traded flavors, peanut butter for caramel, chocolate for vanilla, each one pretending to be on a mission to Mars. They were snacks for a decade obsessed with the future, when every invention seemed like a promise of something greater. And even though space food sticks eventually disappeared from shelves, their legacy lived on as a symbol of pure 1970s optimism. It didn't matter that they tasted terrible. What mattered was the dream behind them, the idea that we were all reaching for the stars, one chewy bite at a time. Evaporated milk used to be a poor man's secret weapon. It sat right there next to the condensed stuff, in a small metal can with a price tag you barely noticed. You kept a few in the cupboard for emergencies, or baking, or when there was no fresh milk in the fridge and the store was too far or too expensive. Back then, a can cost less than a candy bar. Today, you might be better off just buying real milk. It was used in coffee, poured over cereal, and stirred into mashed potatoes, and somehow, it worked. You could stretch it with water or use it full strength when you needed extra creaminess. It was cheap comfort, quiet, overlooked, and always there when the fridge let you down. Now it sits on the shelf with a price tag that makes you double-check if you grabbed the wrong brand. That can, that once cost less than 50 cents, is flirting with $2 in some stores. It is not flashy, it is not trendy. But for people who grew up on it, evaporated milk still holds a place in the pantry and in the budget, even if it pinches now. If you saw one of these leaning against a kid's garage, you knew they were living a different life. The Sears 10-speed Free Spirit was not just a bicycle, it was an upgrade. Taller, sleeker, and built for long rides, this thing looked like it came with a training manual. And unlike your single-speed hand-me-down, this had gears, 10 of them. That meant you could coast up hills while everyone else was walking theirs to the top. But bikes like this did not come cheap. They were department store royalty. Rich kids got them for birthdays, milestones, or just because. The paint never chipped, the chain never squeaked, and the kid riding it always looked like they had somewhere important to be, even if they were just circling the cul-de-sac. And when they pulled up to school, they parked them like prized possessions. You did not dare lean your bike next to theirs. It just looked wrong. These bikes were made for smooth roads, summer wind, and families who had extra room in the garage. You could hear the click of the shifters from a mile away, and every click reminded you that some kids were already going places, even if it was just around the block. Dry egg noodles in cellophane bags were the unsung hero of the pantry. You could get a whole bag for less than $1, and they could turn into just about anything. They boiled fast, held sauce well, and didn't need anything but a little margarine and salt to be considered dinner. If you had canned soup, they went in. If you had leftover meat, they soaked it up. They were soft, simple, and endlessly forgiving. You didn't read recipes, you cooked by feel, by habit, by hunger, and somehow those plain old noodles came out just right. They were the background singer in 100 family dinners. You could stretch them over multiple nights or serve them all at once when company came by. Sometimes you buttered them with pepper and called it done. Other times you baked them into casseroles that fed a crowd. They were bland, yes, but also blank, ready for anything. No one praised the noodles, but no one left the table hungry. In the 1970s, this was your food safety net, cheap, filling, and flexible. Dry egg noodles were not a luxury, but they were a lifeline. Before phones, before messages popped up on screens, there were notes, handwritten, folded into perfect triangles, slipped quietly across desks like tiny sacred secrets. Do you like him? Circle yes or no. Want to hang out after school? You would risk everything to pass one, a teacher's glare, a detention, maybe even getting your note read out loud. But you did it anyway, because you had something to say and no other way to say it. The paper was lined, the ink always smudged. Sometimes the words were crossed out and rewritten 3 times before it felt right. And when someone passed one to you, it meant the world. A joke, a doodle, a question that made your stomach twist. These notes were how teenagers communicated when nobody else was watching. It was raw, personal, real. You kept them in your locker, in your pockets, or folded inside your diary. Some of us still have them, stashed in a box somewhere, yellowed and soft at the edges. A little piece of who we were, passed hand to hand. Canned Vienna sausages were never about taste. They were about having something, anything, on the shelf when everything else was gone. They came in small cans, floating in mystery liquid, and were eaten with crackers, straight from the tin or sliced into beans or rice. Used to be 50 cents a can. Now they are well over $1 and shrinking. You open the can and wonder where the rest of them went. Vienna sausages were poor people food, survival food, end of the month, no shame, full stomach food. Now they cost enough to make you hesitate, and that hesitation says everything. You do not buy them because they taste good. You buy them because they keep you fed, but even that small comfort now comes with sticker shock. These things were loud, literally and figuratively. Custom name belt buckles became a full-blown trend in the 1970s, and if your name was shining in metal across your waist, you were automatically cooler. They were chunky, shiny, and spelled out exactly who you were. And trust me, only certain kids wore them. The ones whose parents took them to the mall and said, "Pick anything you want." These buckles were not just about fashion, they were about identity. In a time before social media, this was your personal brand, worn right at the center of your body. You would walk into school and bam, there it was. Tony, Michelle, Jason, like a name tag that you had to earn. It said, "I matter." It said, "Look at me." And more than anything, it said, "I am not afraid to shine." Most of us could not afford them. Maybe you had a plain belt. Maybe you had no belt at all. But the kids with custom buckles, they made sure you saw them. They would tug their shirts up just enough, stand with hands on hips, or lean against lockers so that metal gleamed in the hallway light. It was all for show, and it worked. Canned chicken or turkey, store brand of course, was not about flavor. It was about feeding your family fast and cheap. You opened the can and got a mound of shredded meat floating in mystery broth. You drained it, fluffed it with a fork, and hoped the salt and spices would do the rest. It was perfect for sandwiches, casseroles, and anything involving cream of something soup. It did not taste like fresh meat, but it didn't need to. It was meat, and that was enough. You could stretch one can across an entire pot of noodles, and nobody complained. It made a good filling for pot pie when the freezer had nothing else to offer. You might mix in mayo and onions or eat it plain on toast if it was one of those weeks. It wasn't juicy, it wasn't tender, but it was protein and it mattered. Some folks turned their nose up at it, but most kept a few cans in the back of the cupboard. It might not have had flavor, but it had purpose. In the 1970s, meat was a luxury, and canned versions were a compromise that kept dinner from falling apart. You could mix it with noodles, rice, or even top it on saltines when you were short on bread. It came through when nothing else did. No one raved about it, but they were always glad it was there. Canned poultry may have been humble, but it filled plates, filled sandwiches, and filled that space in the cupboard labeled "just in case." In the 1970s, your locker was not just where you kept your books, it was your billboard. And if you were a teenager back then, chances are David Cassidy was front and center, smiling, dreamy, hair feathered to perfection. You might have first seen him on The Partridge Family, but after that it was game over. You were in love, not in a silly, passing way, but in that deep, unshakable, totally irrational teen kind of love. You tore his picture out of magazines, carefully folded it, taped it up inside your locker next to stickers, notes, and maybe a photo booth strip with your best friend. It was a shrine, a tiny 12-inch wide expression of who you were or who you wanted to be. If someone else had the same poster, it sparked an instant bond. You were part of a secret club that understood what real heartthrob loyalty meant. And if anyone made fun of it, you defended David like he was your actual boyfriend. For those few minutes between classes, opening that locker felt like opening a little window into a better world. A world where your favorite songs played non-stop, where crushes always liked you back, and where David Cassidy was just waiting to notice you. It was harmless. It was obsessive. It was perfect. Looking back, it is easy to laugh. But those little things meant everything. And for some of us, they still do. Hot dogs in bulk packs were never glamorous, but they were survival food. A 10-pack could stretch across multiple meals, especially if you had buns or just bread. You boiled them, grilled them, nuked them. Kids ate them cold out of the fridge, and they used to be cheap, really cheap. Now even basic hot dogs have seen a price jump. Some packs are nearing $6, and the bigger family sizes do not save much anymore. And if you want anything fancier than the pink tube kind, be ready to fork over almost 10. Hot dogs were supposed to be recession-proof, that thing you could always afford. Toss a pack in the cart, dinner was done. Now they are joining bacon in the "is it worth it" category. For better or worse, even hot dogs are starting to feel like a treat. These were not just toys. They were explosions with permission slips. Model rocket launch sets in the 1970s were the holy grail of cool. You got a tube, some fins, a nose cone, and most importantly, a real engine. You could build it, paint it, and watch it launch hundreds of feet into the sky. But they were not cheap, and they were not sold just anywhere. You needed adult supervision, wide open spaces, and money for replacement engines. That meant most kids never got to launch one. Rich kids, though, they had the whole setup. They would bring them to school science fairs or launch them at the park on weekends with their parents filming from the sidelines. You could hear the countdown and your heart would pound, even if it was not your rocket. It was the kind of moment you would remember for the rest of your life, just watching. The blast-off made you feel like something bigger was always just out of reach. The rest of us just stood back, hoping to feel the whoosh as it lifted off. And when that rocket cracked through the clouds and left a trail of smoke behind, it felt like freedom, like possibility, like everything you wanted but could not quite reach. Bulk rice in paper sacks was a staple that never ran out. You bought it in big brown bags, plain, no pictures, just a weight and a price. It sat in the pantry like a promise, always there when the fridge looked bare. You measured it by the cup, cooked it in a dented pot, and served it under just about everything. When there was meat, rice stretched it. When there was no meat, rice was enough. You rinsed it in a strainer that was slightly bent, watching cloudy water swirl down the sink. Sometimes it bubbled over and made a mess, but no one got mad. It meant dinner was almost ready. You learned to measure it without thinking. 1 part rice to 2 parts water, just like Mom said. Leftovers went into the fridge in stained plastic containers, ready for another meal tomorrow. Sometimes it was fried with onions and eggs, sometimes just reheated with a splash of broth. It was plain but never boring. Not when you were hungry. Rice didn't ask for much, and it gave back everything. Sometimes it stuck to the bottom of the pan. Sometimes it came out perfect. Either way, you ate it. It was cheap, filling, and impossible to ruin beyond saving. With a little margarine and salt, it tasted like comfort. You could make a whole meal out of it if you had to. Rice with beans, rice with canned gravy, rice with whatever leftovers were still good. You did not think of it as poor food. You thought of it as normal. The bag might tear if it sat too long, so you kept it clipped shut with a clothespin, because every grain counted. In the 1970s, bulk rice was not a trend. It was survival wrapped in brown paper. There was no freedom quite like a bike in the 1970s. No schedule, no helmet, just you and your rusted 10-speed flying down the sidewalk like you had somewhere to be. You did not. That was the point. You pedaled to the store for gum, to your friend's house just to hang. You rode in packs, racing down hills, throwing your hands in the air like Evel Knievel. Nobody tracked your location. Your parents did not panic if you disappeared for a few hours. Be home by dark, they said. So you kept one eye on the sun, one on the road, and hoped you made it back before the streetlights flickered on. It was pure, unsupervised childhood. Scraped knees, popped tires, cardboard in the spokes to make it sound like a motorcycle. Sometimes your bike broke down and you just walked it the rest of the way, talking about everything and nothing with whoever stuck by you. It was never about the destination. It was about how far you could go before someone called you home. You were not just riding a bike. You were becoming your own person. Every block was yours to conquer. Every shortcut became a story. In the 1970s, your bike was your first taste of independence, and maybe your last for a while. And as the sun dipped low and you coasted into the driveway, you felt bigger than you were. That kind of freedom, you never really forget it. Frozen fish sticks were once a weeknight hack. You could feed the family, serve them with fries, and still come in under budget. The box was big, the sticks were crispy-ish, and no one asked what kind of fish it actually was. You dipped it in ketchup or tartar sauce and called it done. That box that used to cost $3? It is closer to $7 now. And the sticks are smaller, thinner, more breading, less fish. Even the bargain brands have gone up. And it is not like anyone thought frozen fish sticks were top-tier cuisine. They were there for the nights when you had no energy, no plan, and no money. But now, they are part of the inflation club. You still eat them, you still sort of enjoy them, but you cannot ignore the price anymore. Even fake fish got expensive. Before binge-watching existed, before algorithms decided what you liked, there was one show that made everything feel okay. Happy Days. It came on just when you needed it, after a long day of school, after too much homework, after you had just been grounded for coming home late. You would sink into the couch, maybe with a bowl of cereal or a soda, and there they were, Richie, Potsy, and the Fonz. A crew of characters living in a cleaner, simpler version of the 1950s. One that somehow made the 1970s feel just a little less chaotic. You knew every catchphrase. You knew exactly when the laugh track would kick in. And when Fonzie hit the jukebox and it actually worked, you believed it could work for you too. Happy Days was more than a TV show. It was comfort, familiar, warm, a place where the problems always got solved in 30 minutes or less. And for a teenager trying to figure life out, that was a miracle. Looking back, it was kind of genius. A nostalgic show about the past that became a core memory of the present. For 1/2 hour, everything was cool, everything was all right, and everything felt like it was going to be just fine. Jiffy Corn Muffin Mix was once the quiet hero of weeknight dinners. That little blue box with the cartoon corn never changed, and neither did its role. Cheap, easy, and guaranteed to bake into something that felt like comfort. For a while, you could grab a box for under 30 cents, and it would stretch into warm cornbread for the whole family. Add milk, add an egg, stir and bake. It did not get much simpler than that. Now, you pay nearly triple, and it is still the exact same box. The price just grew up without warning. You used to grab 5 boxes without thinking. Now you look at the shelf and wonder if you really need cornbread that bad. It still tastes good, still does the job. But there is something off about paying a premium for what once was a dollar-stretching staple. Families used to use it to bulk out chili nights, turn leftovers into something new, or just make breakfast a little special. It was part of that dependable aisle, the baking row where your cart stayed cheap. Not anymore. Jiffy corn muffin mix is still around, still reliable, but these days it costs enough that you only buy 1 or 2. And every time you do, it kind of stings a little. Economy-size bags of popcorn kernels were the go-to snack when the cupboard was looking thin. One giant bag could last for weeks, maybe longer. You popped it in oil on the stove, no microwave, no fancy machines, just a pot, a lid, and the sound of hope. The kernels jumped, hissed, and turned into fluffy handfuls of salty comfort. Sometimes you burned the bottom layer, sometimes you nailed it. You salted it heavy, added a little margarine if you had it, and served it up in bowls or paper bags. It was movie night food, after-school food, or just something to fill the gap between meals. You made it by feel, counting the seconds between pops with your ear to the lid. You knew just how much oil to use, even without a measuring spoon. Sometimes you added sugar and made kettle corn before you even knew what kettle corn was. It fed a whole group of kids for the cost of 1 box of cereal. Even the unpopped kernels were kept, just in case you could try again. You burned your fingers more than once reaching into the pot too soon. The smell filled the house and drew people in like magic, and somehow that bag always lasted longer than you thought it would. It cost less than $1, and somehow it felt like a treat. Popcorn kernels were proof that something simple could still feel special. Margarine in a tub was the cheaper answer to butter, and for a long time it stayed in its lane. It spread easily, kept forever in the fridge, and came in tubs big enough to last all month. You could bake with it, fry eggs in it, melt it over vegetables, or slather it onto toast. Some people swore by it. Others just could not afford anything else. Either way, it got the job done. For years, you could get a whole tub for under $1. Now that same tub is pushing $3, and if you go for a buttery spread or something with olive oil, forget it. You are still getting oil and flavoring, but paying like it is whipped gold. The ingredients have not changed, but the price sure has. The basic brands that once saved you money are now neck and neck with store-brand butter, and that makes it harder to justify. For a while, margarine felt like a recession-proof staple, something you could count on in lean times. But today, it feels like you are being charged more for settling. It still lives in fridges across America, but now it comes with a side of frustration. When even margarine feels expensive, you start to wonder what cheap even means anymore. Frozen pie crust discs were your shortcut to something that felt homemade. They came stacked in 2s, separated by paper, and wrapped in waxy plastic. You let them thaw on the counter and prayed they did not crack. Filled with canned fruit or leftover meat, they turned into dessert or dinner depending on the day. You pinched the edges, brushed the tops with a little milk, and baked until golden brown. They were flaky enough, forgiving enough, and always appreciated. You rolled them thinner if you needed to stretch them. If one tore, you patched it with your fingers and kept going. Sometimes they stuck to the pan, and you served them anyway. The smell of them baking made the house feel warmer, even in the middle of summer. No one asked if it came from scratch. They just said, "Thank you." Nobody cared that it came from the freezer. They cared that you made something with it. They saved you time, saved you ingredients, and gave you something to serve with pride. Frozen pie crusts were not homemade, but they still came from a place of care. The whole week led up to Friday night. Whether you cared about football or not did not matter. The game was just the excuse. The real show was in the stands, under the lights, with the smell of popcorn in the air and the band marching loud and proud across the field. You showed up early to save seats with your friends. You wore your school colors like armor, cheered when everyone else did, even if you had no clue what just happened. In the 1970s, high school football games were the stage for teenage life. Crushes bloomed in the bleachers. Gossip flew faster than the football. Pep rallies in the gym that afternoon had already pumped everyone up, with cheerleaders tossing pom-poms and the principal trying too hard to be cool. The whole town seemed to show up. Parents, teachers, former students. It made you feel like you were part of something bigger, something that mattered. Even if your team lost, you would still pile into someone's car afterward and head to the diner, or just cruise around, still buzzing from the night. For a few hours, the future did not exist. Just bright lights, loud cheers, and the feeling that this, right here, was what being young was all about. Baking soda in bulk boxes was not just for baking. It sat in the fridge to keep things fresh, under the sink for cleaning, and on the shelf in case a recipe called for it. You used it in biscuits, in pancakes, and in cookies when you got lucky enough to bake. A spoonful could lift a batter or scrub a sink. It never expired, never spoiled, and never let you down. The box was always just a little dusty, with the cardboard flap bent back from years of use. You tapped it into your hand because the opening never worked right. It fizzed when you added vinegar, and somehow that always felt like magic. You poured it down drains, into shoes, and over stovetops without thinking twice. There was always a box open somewhere in the house, half used but still useful. It was invisible help, quiet, cheap, and always ready. It was the kind of item that did not get talked about, but got used constantly. You bought it once and forgot about it, until you needed it again. In the 1970s, baking soda was the cheapest multi-tool in the kitchen. Off-brand soda in 2-liter bottles was the ultimate loophole. It tasted close enough, fizzed just fine, and cost a fraction of the name brands. For birthday parties, barbecues, and lunchroom trades, those big, bold-colored bottles were a lifesaver. Cola, orange, grape, take your pick. You could buy 4 for the price of 1 Coke and no one really complained. Now those same 2-liter off-brand sodas are over $1, sometimes close to $2. And the name brand versions? Practically luxury items. Suddenly generic is not so generic in price anymore. The shrinkflation is real too. Less fizz, smaller necks, faster staleness. And yet the price keeps rising, like we are all pretending these bottles were always worth that much. It used to be a safe grab at the checkout line. Toss in a bottle, no guilt, no stress. Now you catch yourself calculating how many cups you will actually get out of it. Off-brand soda, once made cheap, feel cheerful. Now it is just another product that forgot why people loved it in the first place. It still sits on the bottom shelf, but not quite as proudly. The line wrapped around the block. You were not even sure what you were waiting for, but everyone said it was going to change everything. In 1977, Star Wars was not just a movie. It was an event. You stood with your friends, nervous with excitement, wondering how a space movie could be that good. Some kids came dressed in makeshift costumes. Others just held onto their ticket stubs like they were gold. You waited and waited. And when the doors finally opened, it felt like stepping into another universe. Lightsabers, spaceships, a villain in all black whose breathing haunted your dreams. It was loud. It was fast. It was unlike anything you had ever seen before. And the moment it ended, you knew you had to see it again. It was not just about the story. It was about what it made you feel. Like the world had just gotten bigger. You bought the action figures. You argued over who was cooler, Han Solo or Luke Skywalker. And for weeks afterward, kids would hum the theme in the hallways, turning pencils into blasters and backpacks into spaceships. That first time? Unforgettable. Because that movie did not just blow your mind, it changed the world. Cream of mushroom soup used to be the unsung hero of 1,000 casseroles. It was not something you ate on its own, but it was the base of every budget recipe your mom made from a church cookbook. You poured it into green beans, poured it over rice, or mixed it into tuna noodles and called it dinner. Back then, it was under $1, always. Now, closer to $2, and that is if you are lucky. Some stores price it like it is homemade French bisque. You used to toss 3 or 4 into the cart without thinking. Now you scan the shelf and hope for a 2-for-1 deal. And it is not just mushroom, cream of chicken, celery, broccoli. They are all climbing like they forgot who they were feeding. For generations, these soups were budget stretchers. They glued together ingredients that had no business being called a meal. But now they are part of the problem. Casseroles just got more expensive. If these forgotten flavors stirred up a memory or made you smile, share your favorite in the comments, give this video a like to keep the nostalgia cooking, and subscribe so we can keep opening the pantry door to the past together.